Joy is an act of resistance, and Bad Bunny's halftime show was the embodiment of this. In this video, we're going to dive into how so. But first, let's clarify what the phrase joy is an act of resistance even means. In fact, first, quickly, let me give my personal glaring gringa disclosure. This commentary is not in any way me trying to claim expertise in Puerto Rican or Latino or Hispanic cultures and experiences, but rather I'm analysing this halftime show from a design perspective, specifically as someone who examines design through the lens of social science and social justice. Okay, now back to defining what we mean when we say joy is an act of resistance. This may be the first time you're hearing the phrase, or maybe you've seen it on social media. As noted in this Code Switch episode from last year, there's a lot of folks using it to caption their Instagram pics of them at brunch or at the beach, and I even have to confess I used it as a caption on a picture of me back in 2021. Why is it given this reductress image? Now, I will say it wasn't my only form of resistance, but nonetheless, I don't think I would post this now. However, I do strongly believe in the concept. The phrase itself was coined by the poet Toy Derricotte in the opening line of the Telecycle, though we have seen this notion wave throughout black feminist thought for decades. For example, by Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and Angela Davis and my personal hero, Maya Angelou. More recently, we've seen this further expanded by the likes of Imani Perry in her book Black and Blues, which is so beautiful. I couldn't recommend it more highly. And also in Kelly Carter Jackson's book, We Refuse, which is also fantastic. I could literally feel my mind expanding as I was reading it, in which there is an entire chapter on the role of joy in black resistance and refusal. And from an entire chapter to an entire book, we've seen this in the work of Adrienne Marie Brown in her book Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, in which she describes pleasure activism as the work of reclaiming wholeness, satisfaction, and liberation from oppressive forces, and as a stepping stone towards healing, empathy, and a more sustainable future. And so, inspired by the work of these black feminist authors, particularly the concepts of liberation, empathy, and sustainability, along with the 6 examples outlined in this article by Ingrid Fettel-Lee, who founded the Aesthetics of Joy, which I absolutely adore. So, between these, I wanted to create my own framework to help explain how the Bad Bunny halftime show perfectly exuded the phrase joy is an act of resistance. So my framework breaks it down into 3 categories. 1, joy is dignity. 2, joy is humanizing. And 3, joy is self-care. Let's dive into this first one. Joy is dignity. This category is more inward-facing towards Latino and Hispanic communities, including specifically Puerto Ricans. It's a way to empower and reclaim. It's a way for individuals who've been demonized for so long, been deemed less than, been deemed other, to be reminded that actually, no, we have a culture worth celebrating. We're fine just the way we are. In fact, we're more than fine. It's not a curse to be like us, it's a blessing. It's a way of fighting against what's known as social dominance theory and high social dominance orientation, which is a social psychology phenomenon, in that it's essentially saying F you to the people in the dominant social group, i.e. the mainstream, most socially acceptable, normalized group in America, white, English-speaking American citizens. And I say that with air quote, as I'm saying this based on observations of how society is, not how it should be. But if you have high social dominance orientation, that is what you think. You have this idea that your culture is superior. So this group of all-American, white, English-speaking, conservative feel that they're at the top of the social hierarchy for a reason, that their way is the right way, and that everyone should conform to be more like them. But instead, dignity in this sense is folks out with this group refusing that dominant narrative. It's refusing to shrink or be ashamed. In the wise words of Beyonce, it's making it clear, you won't break my soul.
Can she go making a video without mentioning Beyonce?
And in Bad Bunny's halftime show, this was primarily expressed via pride and persistent. Let's look at pride first. By this, I mean exhibiting pride in one's culture. We see this in the light blue Puerto Rican flag symbolizing independence. Lady Gaga wore a flamenco-style dress in the same shade, and her brooch was a flor de maga, the national flower of Puerto Rico. Ironic that it's called a flor de maga. Speaking of Lady Gaga, another way we see cultural pride exhibited is the refusal to assimilate to what's expected, to that dominant social group. This was most clearly seen in the fact that Bad Bunny sang in Spanish almost the entire performance. but also Lady Gaga's dancing and the fact she amended her song to a salsa version. She, i.e. white English speaker, assimilated into Bad Bunny's culture. We also saw pride in the celebrations of aspects of Latino and Hispanic culture, like those gorgeous, bright, saturated storefronts, the men playing dominoes, the female nail technicians, and I particularly liked this latter reference because of the long-standing significance of long, elaborate, bold nail art in Black and Latina and Hispanic communities. And the fact that it highlighted that, yes, while this may be a global phenomenon now, I mean, look at me, a white girl in Scotland with these intricate designs. Oh my god, my camera went crazy. And this is all because of the influence of those working class women of colour who for years were looked down upon, seen as unprofessional or low class. Yet, once it became popular with white celebrities, it was then normalised. In fact, not just seen as socially acceptable, but trendy, fashionable, desirable. And yet, for these working class women of colour, despite being the architects of this aesthetic, often didn't receive the credit that they deserve, or even that same level of acceptance. So I love that Bad Bunny gave a very clear reminder of its origins, making sure that Black, Latina and Hispanic communities feel proud of being the originators, as they should. Next up, oh my god, let me tell you, I loved this opening scene. This design on the wall, linking of American football to Puerto Rican culture. So the dominoes spelling LX for the Super Bowl year, the coconut football, bird in paradise perching on the mini goalpost, and then we have the coffee, music, the brightness, the florals. This first image immediately transported us, which only continued as the cameras led us to the field, where Bad Bunny and his team had completely transformed it into a full Puerto Rican landscape, both rural and urban. Plus, all these other design nods, from the architectural, such as the replicas of La Casita, which Bad Bunny had on his tour, and the plaza in San Juan, to the interior, like that familiar white patio furniture set. It was clear that it was painstakingly designed to bring aesthetics that are prominent in Puerto Rico and other Latino and Hispanic environments right into the center of America's biggest stage. And all of that together curated this energy for those watching who have spent their lives feeling less than or not deemed American enough to say our culture is worthy of being appreciated and celebrated, and it absolutely deserves to be on this stage. So that's pride. What about persistence? Well, they're not so much two separate concepts, but rather persistence adds extra depth to the pride. So Bad Bunny showed that yes, this is great. We should feel good about this. We should be proud. But don't forget, the fact that we've managed to still do this, despite the fact that you really don't want us to, and have spent a lot of time trying to make sure we don't, we persisted. And where do we see this exhibited? Well, when Ricky Martin sings Lo que le pasó a Hawaii, i.e. What Happened in Hawaii, which is Bad Bunny's song raising concern of the impact of US colonization on these native islands. And we also saw it clearly in the symbolism of the exploding power lines while performing El Apagón, i.e. the blackout, a clear statement on what's called energy colonialism in Puerto Rico. For example, as noted by Cecilio Ortiz Garcia in this Conversation article, the grid has become the poster child of the decay of the colonial system, its institution, and a very vulnerable population. This is colonial abandonment, not poor management. And this article gives the perfect example of Hurricane Maria in 2017, in which Puerto Rico experienced an 11-month blackout, the longest in US history. During this time, federal aid was significantly lower than for US states also affected by hurricanes during this time. And I actually remember this. So during this time, I lived in Florida, and you could quite clearly see, if you were paying attention, the difference in the federal response between, say, Florida and Puerto Rico. Despite those affected both being US citizens, we saw this pride yet prejudice vibe also in the camera work of the show. That scene of the two men dancing together, and it was subtle, but it was a statement nonetheless. It was saying, hey, America, you can pass all these anti-LGBTQ plus laws all you want, but we're still here and we're still queer, in both senses of the word. And I also personally really loved how this persistence was embodied from an environmental design perspective. So we first see these nods to the sugar canes and the workers in the pava hats. This highlights the colonial past of Puerto Rico, as well as the often under-recognized, extremely hard, and let's be honest, exploitative agricultural work undertaken by minorities in the US, particularly Latino and Hispanic immigrants. And it was also particularly dominant in this Brooklyn neighborhood scene, in which we see the Caribbean Social Club and its owner, Maria Antonia K, aka Tonita. And this was powerful because it highlighted Puerto Rican pride in that Tonita founded this Puerto Rican social club 50 years ago, and folks from across the diaspora still gather today, but it also highlights the persistence because the gentrification of the Williamsburg area has led to this club, the last of its kind in Brooklyn, on the brink of erasure. But to me, one of the most powerful ways that we witness this is if we take a step back, we look at this wider, almost meta picture. Simply Bad Bunny being the halftime performer is in and of itself an example of pride despite prejudice, pride through persistence, because he successfully took something that had been essentially banned less than 30 years ago to one of the biggest, most watched events in the world. But how so? Well, historically, as noted in the Aesthetics of Joy article, banning music and dancing is actually pretty common in regimes where the person or the social group in power want to hold on to that power at any cost. And one example from my own country's history, so I'm Scottish, and bagpipes are considered our national instrument and have been for centuries. However, what a lot of people don't know is that they were previously banned by the British government in 1746, and in fact even labelled as instruments of war. Okay. And without going too far down into this rabbit hole, this is essentially because of something called the Jacobite Uprising the year before, in which the Scots fought for independence, and they didn't win. But the British government at the time then banned these bagpipes and also Highland dress, i.e. kilts, specifically to diminish the Scottish sense of identity and morale. And the only reason we still have bagpipes today is because of those Scots that said F you to those people in authority, refused to shrink, refused to be ashamed of their culture, and via underground bagpipe playing managed to just keep the tradition alive. Well, Bad Bunny's defiance may not have involved kilts this time, but he popularized reggaeton globally, and now he's bringing it to this mainstream stage in the heart of the USA for the first time. Well, it wasn't really the heart, it was at the coast, but you know what I mean. And this is important because in the mid-90s and early 2000s, the police and National Guard raided shops to confiscate the reggaeton tapes and CDs and reportedly fined shop owners if they found them playing their music. And this was due to reggaeton being labelled immoral and essentially contrary to middle-class values. It was obscene and promoting antisocial behaviour, and even blamed for the violence in the region at the time. In fact, so much so that in 2002, Senator Velda Gonzalez led public hearings to regulate the lyrics and dance moves of reggaeton. However, critics have said this is a moral panic caused by this dominant class, whose real issue was not so much the music itself, but the musicians behind it. Considering it originated within Puerto Rico's most poor, marginalized, and black communities. And Daddy Yankee, one of the pioneers of the genre, stated, "Many people tried to stop us. Government tried to stop us, and we're looking down on us as young people from the barrios, i.e. poorer neighbourhoods." And just like those prior Scots and their bagpipes, genre continued to spread underground. In fact, it was literally called underground before it was more widely known as reggaeton. And over the years, thanks to pioneers like Daddy Yankee, who Bad Bunny paid homage to in his show when he played Gasolina, absolute banger. And now Bad Bunny, who grew up in this, what is essentially Prohibition era, has taken it from those hidden clubs to the global stage. And the very final point I'll make here, because it was a perfect ending and a perfect example of showing joy as dignity via pride and persistence. Towards the end of the performance, and one of the few moments he spoke in English, Bad Bunny said, "God bless America," and then listed out all of the countries across all of the Americas, and ending the list with the phrase, "We are still here," and spiking his football that was labelled, "Together we are America." It was such a unifying moment for all the individuals in those countries who have ever felt less than or excluded to see themselves celebrated, and it was showing that across the decades in several of these countries, the residents could say there may have been attempts to remove what we do and what we love and who we are, but we are still here. and always will be. So the second, joy is humanizing. The other two are much shorter. So unlike dignity, which is more inward facing and empowering for Latino and Hispanic community, by humanizing, I mean more outward facing to people of other ethnicities, particularly the dominant social class that we discussed earlier, i.e. white English speaking Americans. And with humanizing, the goal is to build bridges, recognize, relate. It's a push to rehumanize a group that's been so dehumanized. And how did Bad Bunny do this in the show? Well, we saw his Grammy speech a few weeks before, which really set the tone, in which he said, "Before I say thanks to God, I'm gonna say ice out. We're not savages, we're not animals, we're not aliens. We are humans and we are Americans." Bad Bunny, knowing he had the US and the world watching, designed, along with his team, a halftime show so spectacularly humanizing that it made so many of us, again, around the world, emotional, so grateful for multiculturalism, and as Casey Musgraves put it, that made me feel more proudly American than anything Kid Rock has ever done. And some examples of this in the show, the wedding scenes, so beautiful, and it didn't need to be said that it was a wedding scene. There was no sign in English saying wedding. So many of us from around the world immediately recognized it as a wedding scene because we've witnessed, we've experienced something similar. We've enjoyed those events filled with love and laughter. The kid falling asleep on the chairs because their families are up too late partying. That is definitely a thing here in Scotland anyway. And as stated in the It's Been a Minute podcast episode, what is more wholesome and beautiful than a wedding? And even if it's subconscious, we relate to that. We realize, oh, this audio, it may be in a different language, but these visuals show we're so much more similar than we are different. And then this message was, of course, made explicit on the Jumbotron. The only thing more powerful than hate is love. Exactly. But then also all of those bright colors and the rhythm and the energy, all that motion, it made us smile and want to dance with them. And while I simultaneously saw that this was a clear celebration of a culture that, you know, I wasn't a part of, and I just appreciated witnessing that, I was also low-key getting FOMO. Like, I wanted to go in and dance and join this party. It had me craving that feeling of community and connection, which is what being a human is all about. And in fact, we even saw glimmers of this in the reactions online after the show, particularly from Canadians. After being included in that America's list was hysterical. Canadians were hyped. They were leaning into it. And it felt like this big inside joke that even if you technically weren't involved in it, we still felt included. And lastly, on this point of humanizing, back to the performance itself and the way the cinematography was designed, we had those close-up camera shots and the intense eye contact. Bad Bunny staring into our soul. It was intimate and it was personal. We felt connected. But we also had the wider shots, now still at eye level, so we still felt involved. It still felt human, as if it was our POV. And the cameras were gliding across all the performers, who were all in similar neutral toned clothing, but that contrasted with their different skin tones and hairstyle, but not in a harsh way like oil and water, but smoothly, poetically, like milk and coffee. And these camera angles in this beautiful blended crowd really just showed us how much better it feels to be harmonious rather than harmful. And again, even if you didn't understand a word of the show, you felt welcomed into our world, even if only for 13 minutes. And it helped us remember that could be our world. It could be the US. This idea of the melting pot could be reality. And I know that could sound utopian and unrealistic, and there's valid points there, of course. But as said in the It's Been a Minute podcast, wouldn't you so much rather live in that world built for us today at the halftime show than the other world we've been seeing? So why not at least try? And lastly, the final category, joy is care, particularly self-care. And this is especially important for the people in these vulnerable communities that have been forced to persist, but it's also for everyone else who's in this good fight with them. It's for the advocates and the activists and the allies. It's for all those who do want to take the inspiration from that world we saw on Super Bowl Sunday and are motivated to make it a reality. We want to see that world where little innocent brown boys see someone like Bad Bunny win a Grammy. And no, I'm not a monster. I'm not a savage. I'm a future Grammy winner. I'm anything I want to be. To see that world, we need to create it. And that takes time. As much as we would love it not to be, it is long term. And it needs optimism and sustainability. And hopelessness and burnout are its enemies. But how do we do that? How do we ensure we stay optimistic and avoid burnout? Well, sometimes you just gotta shake your ass and have a good motherfucking time. And I mean that so seriously. Rejuvenation is a non-negotiable in social justice. Not only is dancing and letting go good for the soul, good for the nervous system, but we also need it as part of a long-term strategy. How can we possibly persist with pride? How can we possibly spend years fighting if you didn't celebrate the smaller wins along the way, or find moments to celebrate even when you're losing? It would be impossible. So we need to prioritize having some damn fun, especially since burnout in activism spaces is so high due to most folks not being paid well, having poor work-life balance, and this role taking over your entire identity. And we've gotten to this space where we often feel like having fun means we're failing. It means we're selfish and we're not taking these issues seriously enough, because if we truly understood the horrors, I mean, how could we possibly be happy? And when you start to think or feel that way, you start judging others if they're not feeling like that, and it just becomes this very toxic cycle. But it's also BS. And in fact, that's never actually been the case. And Kelly Carter Jackson notes this in her book We Refuse, with the help of historian Stephanie Camp, who tells the story of Nancy, a formerly enslaved woman who, in the middle of the night during her enslavement, would sneak off into the woods with other enslaved people, and they would sing and dance and play musical instruments. As she notes, men and women strutted and whooped and hollered with laughter. But why? As the book states, Nancy's joy was the reclamation of her time, labour and beauty. She had moments during enslavement that she carved out for herself, for her own enjoyment. She prioritised her own joy, even if only for a few hours. Of course, I'm not comparing this powerful vignette to the NFL Super Bowl halftime show. Bad Bunny did show us the importance of prioritising our own joy, even if only for 13 minutes, in a myriad of ways. And I think this quote from Harriet Cuddiford, the show's creative director, highlights this. She says, "The intention was to talk to things and look at things, but not be on the nose, too descriptive, or try to jam something down people's throats. Let's have joy and celebration and fun, but let's also show his comments in a way that people could discover if they want to." So clearly, while all this symbolism in the performance is important and it was there to be found, it's also important for us to take a second, put down the shovel, stop digging for clues, and just enjoy ourselves. And we saw this fun play out with, of course, the dancing, Latino and Hispanic celebrities joining in the party, having a great time, the wedding party having a great time, everybody having a great time. And if they're having a great time despite, everything going on, why not you? In fact, Tonyita, who, as we discussed, her Caribbean social club faces continuous threat due to gentrification, she was doing shots with Bad Bunny, as referenced in Nueva York. So don't tell me that you can't. Then we see it from the more visual design perspective. Those bright colours, the cheerful choreography, all that energy and motion. In terms of spatial design, that vast array of dancers really encompassing the whole field, taking up all this space and just having an unapologetically good time. And you know what? Let's remind ourselves of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And he was absolutely right. And so if you want to see that justice come to fruition, if you're really about it, you understand and accept that the journey is long. And so to be able to handle that, you've got to care for yourself and others. And part of that is learning how to accept and honour joy, even if that sometimes means creating it yourself. Just like Bad Bunny and his team and community did for this performance, and what Time magazine called the greatest party on earth. And so, to conclude, there's actually so much more I could have gone into and analysed, but if I kept going, I would not stop yapping until next year's Super Bowl, so let me stop here. And finish with this quote from Harriet Cuddiford, the show's creative director, which I think perfectly encompasses those three categories I talked about that exemplify joy as an act of resistance. She says that Bad Bunny's #1 priority, front and centre, was to represent Latino and Hispanic people. He wanted to get them to be seen and loved and shown on the biggest stage of the world. And to me, this is a clear nod to that first component, joy is dignity. And she continues, at the same time, he wanted to speak to everyone and celebrate the things that make life worth living. Dancing, music, love, family, togetherness, which I think perfectly represent joy as humanising and as an act of care. And I think, without a doubt, they knocked it out of the park. Well, the stadium. And if you made it to the end, thank you, bestie. I am so grateful. And if you'd like to see more design videos from this perspective, follow for more. Until then, I hope you feel at home wherever you are.